Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Star Trek Discovery podcast. This is brought to you by StarEdge TrekWare viewers. Star Trek Discovery aired on Monday evening. Thank you to all who could join us to watch it. And here is a podcast which hopes to expound upon ideas, thoughts, opinions of what we thought about the episodes which were viewed on Monday evening. We were in for a treat. There were 2 episodes, which is quite common now with stateside television programs to give us more of a taster. And I must say, I thoroughly enjoyed it. There was obviously a lot which I saw already in the trailers, but the actual storyline, the actual feel of it, I did enjoy. So just before we get stuck in, just to let you know, there are going to be spoilers. So what I suggest, if you haven't already seen it, is obtain access to a Netflix account and pause this podcast and watch it. Otherwise you're going to be a bit confused and possibly angry if I give something away. So let's just set the scene. I'm not going to obviously go into what every detail happened, just set the scene of what we saw. So we saw at the beginning the USS Shenzhou, which was captained by Captain Philippa Grigju. I think that's how you pronounce her name, and she had a first officer, Michael Burnham. They are repairing a relay station which they believe has been damaged. They then uncover that there is a Klingon plot, which we later find out is a means to unite the clans. Michael Burnham kills a Klingon officer or some form of protector on this sacred symbol when she's out there. She somehow makes it back to the ship. And she, in a sense, causes a bit of a war. She speaks to the Vulcan High Council. Well, she speaks to Sarek, her adopted father, which we find out. And of course, we're going to go into a bit of detail about her background in a few moments. And he says, you've got to attack the Klingons. So she sort of mutinies by herself. She knocks out, or tries to nerve pinch the captain. And attempts to fire on the Klingons, but somehow, maybe it was because it was administered by a human rather than a Vulcan, the captain gets up, sends her off to the brig, and whatever, there's a bit of a battle. I say a bit of a battle. They almost got completely wiped out, and in the end they do, by the Klingons, and we see sort of towards the end the captain and the first officer beam on board the Klingon ship, and actually, unfortunately, they try and take one of the Klingons hostage, but that fails, and in the end they kill him. He becomes a martyr, and basically the captain dies. Now, that was a very, very rough sort of story of what we saw in the last night. Now, I just want to pick up on a few things. Firstly, I thought that the feel of it, I really enjoyed. It was much darker than previous Star Treks. Now, this isn't uncommon. We have this with quite a lot of stateside and even English television shows where they've tried to take a certain darker spin on things. And I quite liked it. We got a feel that on the ship, it was slightly dated. There was definitely a feel that the cast actually knew each other, and it's explained that they were on this ship for 7 years before. You do get that feel that there is banter there is enjoyment, there is sort of like tensions when tensions need to be there. I guess the biggest criticism I always had with The Next Generation was the first season, where I just felt people were reading off a script. There is passion with Michael Burnham, there is passion I felt with the captain. And I really like that. I really did. Again, you're more than entitled to your opinion. Obviously, it was a very strong female lead cast, which isn't new to Star Trek. We had Kate Mulgrew as Janeway before. We've had, I don't even remember her name, the number one in DS9. Even in Voyager, there are lots of strong female roles on top of just Janeway. And even I'd go far as back as The Next Generation as well, where we saw, Picard's bird, not Bird, his ex-wife, the Dr. Crusher, also had some very strong roles, and sometimes even standalone episodes. So it's nothing new, but it was nice to see. It really was nice to see. And as I said, I got a feel that on the bridge there was a good vibe. So that's generally about the sort of Federation side of things. And I mean, I really, really enjoyed it. I don't know what his name was, but the character whoever he was played by, the alien who always just predicts something doom and gloom. I really, really liked his character. I liked that he was always fighting with the first officer, and he was just generally a pessimist. They could have obviously recycled certain characters, have loads of Vulcans on there, have loads of they couldn't have Klingons on the bridge, but they could have had like other species who we were aware of. I liked that maybe I didn't recognise everyone on the bridge. Granted, I'm probably not going to see them again because the ship blew up. And this brings me on to my next point, and that is this felt like a prelude to Discovery. I'm not a fan of flashbacks, and we saw a bit of flashback, the way Michael Burnham was raised, how her parents were killed on some colony by some Klingons, and we saw how she grew up in the Vulcan sort of institutes, and she somehow made her way, I don't know how it was, some interspecies, whatever, she made her way back onto a human, a Federation ship, and at first she appears very, very cold, and you're not quite sure because she's human, yet she's sort of got the Vulcan appearances, and that was sort of her background, and I was a bit confused, sort of, by some of her actions, but whatever, we'll leave that aside. I thought the coup was a bit strange for, somebody who sort of uses Vulcan logic, yet takes matters into their own hands by not adhering to a chain of command. I thought that was a bit strange, but then again, that is a human bred in Vulcan culture, and maybe I just need to accept that. So as I said, we didn't see any of Discovery. This entire thing was a prelude. And again, I don't like flashbacks. We saw a tiny bit of that, but I think this entire episode was a massive flashback without us realising it was a flashback. I don't know how Michael Burnham is getting out of jail, because obviously she was stripped of her command and sent to life imprisonment. I don't know how, we're going to pay off some dodgy Starfleet officers to get her out. I'm sure it's going to happen, and I'm sure she's going to find her way onto the Discovery. There's no doubt in my mind about that. But be that as it may, as a sort of run up to Discovery, I like that they set the scene early. It looks like there's going to be a tremendous amount of continuity, not the standalone episodes which we're used to in Star Trek in the bygone years. Granted, Voyager had a general overview of what they wanted to do, get home. DS9 I thought was brilliant, but again, the Dominion War was only, I think, 2 seasons or maybe 3, and the rest were standoff episodes. Enterprise, again, it had that Xindi War feel. I really enjoyed that. I'd never heard of the Xindi before, whatever, but I enjoyed that there was some continuity, and that's something which the Next Generation sorely, sorely missed. Really missed. I really thought they'd do something with the Romulans there. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. There was some good, like, two continuous episodes to be continued from like the end of one season to another, but on the whole, we've never had that continuity. So I am expecting there's going to be the continuity here in Discovery, and I am very much looking forward to that. So, other characters. So also, just as a side point here, a general feel for the ship. I liked also that it did feel a bit dated. I know they explained, but they're using the transporters was like an old technology. There was sort of like an orange tinge to everything on the ship. It was sort of like when you go and look at a flat which hasn't been renovated in like 20 years, and it was sort of like, yes, the cream, I don't know, actually the avocado bathroom was in style then. I got that feel about it. It wasn't all like flash and whatnot. It wasn't all like smooth round edges. It was a bit clumpy. And if you've actually seen the rebooted J.J. Abrams Kelvin timeline films, I actually felt that the ship felt like the USS Franklin in the third Star Trek of the reboots. It had that sort of clunkiness feel on the bridge. Not everything was so smooth, which I liked, because I'm going to have to just accept that with Star Trek these days, it's very difficult for them to sort of wind back the technology when they sort of set the standard in, every single Star Trek. and they've always had difficulties, pushing technology forward, pushing it back. Obviously, I don't expect them to go back to the original series where sort of some form of a Lego brick was put into a computer and the computer spoke. Like, fine, I don't accept that, and I don't really want to either. But I did enjoy that there was sort of an attempt to bring things back a tiny bit. It didn't have, the glare and the flash and the wazam of the J.J. Abrams, which I just thought was way over the top. Although I did enjoy the action film, the action scenes in that. So I did enjoy that. So also on the bridge, we'll speak about Captain Philippa Gregu. Again, strong character. I think my favourite scene in it was when Michael Burnham is saying, "Look, you are wrong. We need to attack the Klingons," and she takes them into the ready room, and basically says, "Privacy, computer privacy." And I'd always imagined, sort of, back in Picard's day when he took someone into his ready room, all of the bridge stood up and they all got their ears to the door, or they could all overhear stuff, what's going on, and they're like, "Oh yeah, like beef, beef, beef." And you know what I mean? Like, just to acknowledge that may very well happen on sort of a small ship, and that there's a nice touch that they said, "Privacy, please." I really, really like that. So we've spoken a bit about, obviously, the Federation, the feel of it, what's going on, what they're doing in the sector. Again, as I said in the introduction, they're out there, they're trying to repair a relay station, and then they encounter the Klingons. Now, obviously, we know the Klingons have had a remake in terms of their facial features and their arts and designs, but in short, what was happening there was, with the Klingons and what's going on in their sort of like timeline at that point, is there's 12 tribes or 12 sort of groups, which I think is interesting, 12, and it's trying to be united by this one Klingon dude who I can't remember the name of, but I'll just call him main Klingon dude. And I liked that they introduced new aspects of the Klingons, like they sort of mummified their bodies and then used them as part of the armour of the ship. I liked that they tried to add on that. Now, I don't fully understand how the actual appearance of the Klingons has changed in 10 years from when we saw them in Kirk's time. But again, you could do one of two things. Either explain it sort of in that DS9 episode where Worf explains that, or I think we even see it in the Enterprise, where there were some sort of primitive Klingons, because they had a eugenics experiment which went wrong, and they basically de-evolved the Klingons into a more sort of pre-evolutionized state, and perhaps these Klingons are sort of, because they haven't integrated, because they seem to be sort of, they seem to have like cults and stuff, and they just dress up with the garb. It could just be heavy makeup in Klingon terms, I don't know. But I liked, they seem quite fierce, they seem quite scary at certain points, and it'll be interesting to see where they go with that. As a general point, I do believe, if you haven't seen it, there's a fan-made film called The Battle of the Prelude to Axanar. If you get the opportunity, do watch it. It's brilliant. I think that this Discovery is going in that direction. I don't want to ruin it for you, so I'm not going to say any more. But I think this is what it's leading up to, and that is part of the Klingons' aims of unifying themselves and finding a common enemy, which in this case I found fascinating in terms of the ideology of it. And that was, and I think it was Shmuel who said it, or maybe it was Elliot. Maybe it was me on this point, actually. Oh, I'm so humble. The actual main dude, the Klingon dude, first takes on this sort of albino Klingon and says, "I don't care if you're black, white, I don't know, Asian, whatever, Klingon equivalent. You are Klingon, that's what's important to me." The sort of like, "We are London, welcome, multicultural, all this jazz." Very, very liberal. However, then when he goes to the other Klingons, when he's called them in from this beacon which sort of lights up and made no real sense to me, if I'll be completely honest with you, how that was a calling for all of them, I don't know. He seemed to then say, "Well, here it comes, we come in peace." He's sort of like mocking the Federation. And, completely sort of Klingon only policy. So it's sort of like going from one extreme of having a very liberal-minded view of Klingons, whoever you are, and I think they describe that white Klingon dude as Klingon of no name. So I don't know if it's like the equivalent of like a Jon Snow sort of bastard child, or what he is, to then going to, yes, we'll accept all Klingons, but Klingons only, not this sort of federation thing, because they clearly see that any integration with other species is just sort of diluting not just their own not just their own sort of interculture, but their actual interspecies, which they don't want to happen. And I quite like the way they mock them. I think my most enjoyable thing actually was, and this is just a side point, when they try to backdate the technology a bit. You see when they're having discussions with the admiral whose ship gets blown up, he sort of just appears in a hologram stand, and this particular stand sort of moves around the ship, but as his ship gets sort of destroyed, it's sort of like jumping around. It's like a dodgy recording, like a dodgy signal. I quite like that touch, and I also liked how the Klingons were like, wait for it. This is what the Federation say. We come in peace, and they're sort of like mocking this hologram, which I thought was really nice, and I thought was a nice touch, other than just the standard like view screen which comes up. So on the Klingons, again, I couldn't remember for the life of me what the Klingons were all called, but suffice to say, he is what everything they tried to do, which was capture this leader so he didn't become a martyr. He's now been killed, and they actually ended up killing the captain at the same time. He has become a martyr, and they killed the captain. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I don't know if the captain's dead. I'm going to say it now. Although they couldn't look onto her body, I'm wondering if the Klingons, as a point of principle, will keep her alive. I don't know. I'm just saying that. And there was also something which I think Adam Ifield pointed out, and that was you never send, obviously, the first officer and the captain away on away missions. We saw that with Picard. He always left Riker, or vice versa. Kirk, he was a bit of a rogue. I don't really know what applied, but we always see that. We never see the first officer and the captain, and it could have just been that Kirk, and Picard learnt it from this incident. It's sort of like, oh yes, do you remember that time when, Captain Jeju, whatever her name was killed, and Michael Burnham was there? That's why we don't do it. That's where the lesson came from, which would be interesting. Now, something else I want to come on to is the Klingon ships. These are completely new to me. I've never seen them before. But what I really liked about the visuals were, I didn't think they were over the top. Even in the battle, I mean, obviously, in this time, the Klingons have always heavily invested in, sort of an arms race. And at this point, they will always outgun the Federation. Granted, at the end, when they're sort of collecting all their dead, they seem to, the Shenzhou beams aboard a photon torpedo onto one of the bodies, and it blows it up. The Klingon ship, fine. I thought that was nothing spectacular. I feel as though it was similar to what we saw in Star Trek II of the rebooted, when they beam the photon torpedoes onto the into the sort of coffins onto the mega ship, which Khan is controlling. So I thought that was a bit of a take from there, but I thought, nice touch. It's one way of explaining sort of how they can get out of this. The battle just seemed to die down a bit. I seem to recall the Klingons, sort of warping out and just saying, look, we won this battle, and we're just going to stick around here if we want to, but we're choosing to leave. I didn't get a feel that it kind of came to an actual close. Obviously, the Admiral's ship just got rammed, which I thought was beautiful. Sort of the Klingon guy was like, yes, prepare to welcome my ship, and he was just thought that meant, like a shuttle pod or something. And then he uses the cloak, and he just sort of rams the Admiral's ships, and the Admiral's sort of all cocky, and he thinks like, oh, I'm all Federation, I can sort this out, diplomacy and whatnot, and it completely backfires. But yeah, I think it's fair to say the Federation lost it. The Klingon ships, what I really liked about the visuals straight at the beginning is the first time that the Shenzhou and the Klingon ship line up, they're not straight in front of each other, like level. the Shenzhou is at an angle, and so is the Klingon ship. Sort of like, yes, in space there is no up, down, straight, whatever, and it probably is in space. They probably are at different angles. I really, really like that touch, and it's something we've never seen before. Also, what I thought was maybe a nod to Enterprise was was to the original series films, was the fact that when you had them sort of using a telescope to look at this object which was mast or cloaked, that sort of reminded me of Star Trek 3 when they steal the Enterprise and they've gone to Genesis and they're sort of looking into space, and somehow they just see some distortion on the viewing screen. So maybe within 10 years, the viewing screen's got that much more advanced. They could detect like sort of a cloak or whatever. I really like that. I really, really like that. So that's generally my thoughts on the Klingons. I thought they seemed quite powerful. Again, we don't know the politics, and I'm very happy for them to go into the Klingon politics. And again, with that continuity, I do think we'll see it. And I mean, I am actually really looking forward to it. I mean, I would give the episode a solid 7.5 or 8 out of 10. The only thing I think which let it down really was that there was too much in the trailers. And every time I was watching something on Discovery, I was like, oh, I saw that in the trailer, which I thought was a bit annoying. But that aside, and also just a funny quirk somebody made when we were here, was that there seemed to be this random character on the bridge who had like one had like a reverse Geordie visor on his head. Don't know what that was all about. And there seemed to be some sort of robot girl who had some helmet on her head. What was that? Was that like a predator? I have no idea what she was, or what they were. And again, it was a shame we didn't get to see more of those characters because they seem to gel really, really well on the bridge. But hopefully some of them will get, re pushed around and somehow make it onto Discovery, and we will build up sort of a relationship with them as the series go on. So, as I said, I would say a solid 7.5 or /8 out of 10. I am generally quite easygoing. I don't like to pick up too many negatives. More actually, I don't really have too many negatives, but I'm sure that there are those out there who will disagree with me, and you are more than welcome to leaving your comments at the bottom. You may just say, "Oh, you're such an optimist. You just love Star Trek. Whatever happens." Yeah, a bit, but I have been critical of certain things in the past. I think they've done this really, really nicely, and I think this is a direction that I'm very, very, very happy to follow. Again, I think it will go down the Axanar route, and if you do get an opportunity, there is a brilliant, brilliant fan-made film called The Prelude to Axanar, which I strongly, strongly recommend you take time and you watch, because that is brilliant, and I'm not going to spoil it for you for what it is. But that's it. So let me know your thoughts, let me know your views. Looking forward to next week's episode, where I imagine somehow we'll see Burnham escape or, pushed out of prison. Again, just on her character, one minor point, which we're just going to have to accept. Apparently she's Spock's half-sister, stepsister. I can only sort of imagine that as, well, I've never heard about it, but then again, there's loads of people who take in, like, let's say, for example, foster kids, and I never knew. So, or whatever, the parents have just never mentioned it because it's never come up in conversation. That's not in a rude way at all. I think the foster system is brilliant. It just happens to know I don't know every single family who I'm sure have taken in foster kids speak about it because it just doesn't come up in conversation. And I think she was probably just a foster kid, basically. I don't think it was a case that they were getting any sort of benefits from the Federation for taking them in. Whatever, it was just whatever. She was a foster kid, and I've never heard about her before. We're just going to have to accept that. There's certain things that are going to stick in this Star Trek, which I'm just not going to be able to explain, and I'm just happy to go with it, as long as it isn't too ridiculous, or as long as it doesn't sort of, dismantle sort of my current view of Star Trek. One final point, and then we will conclude, is that the actual outfits they were wearing, I don't know if anyone really picked up, had the sort of Star Trek sign on it, and it was a bit of a cross between Enterprise and sort of the original series films, which I thought was interesting. but definitely nothing like the original series. Whatever. And then, yes, just one final point, just on the basis of things being continuous. I know back in the past we've had like episodes of Star Trek which were just one-offs and standoffs, and they were sort of like, oh, I've got to watch them just because there may be a reference in years to come you may need to quote. Well, actually, when Michael Burnham and the captain are on that desert island at the beginning, sort of going down and going to the well and shooting the well and getting the water, back in the day, that would have been an entire 45-minute episode of Star Trek, and I would have just had to have watched it and just got on with my life. I'm really, really glad that was only about 3 or 4 minutes, because I'm just sick of sand planets and aliens I've never heard of before. But it was a cute touch. So yes, that's all. Again, hopefully next week we will have episode 2 of the podcast, which will be discussing the 3rd episode of the Star Trek Discovery installment. And until then, from StarEdge TrekWare, we are signing out.